No, we don't work in nurses and hospitals, but if someone came up to you and accused a colleague of a heinous crime, I'm not going to cheapen the conversation by speculating on what that crime might be, and the colleague was, to all intents and purposes, completely innocuous, completely ordinary, completely unremarkable, I think most of us would go, nah, come off it. And then you take it upstairs and you're like, no, look, I mean, coincidences happen. She's a full-time nurse. The odds of her being on duty are quite high, but every single one, the only one who's been on duty forever, yeah, come off it. There's no way she's killing babies. No way. And then you get this quite astonishing exchange with the duty manager when Stephen Breary says, I challenged her, I said, are you saying that you're making this decision against the wishes of 7 consultant paediatricians? And she said yes. Breary said he asked Rees if she would take, quote, responsibility for anything that might happen tomorrow to any other baby. And she is said to have replied, yes. And then a baby collapsed on Letby's shift that day. The nurse was called into a meeting and told for the first time of her link to the deaths in the unit. That's a year since the first 3 deaths were recorded. And she was then placed under supervision. But I still don't think anyone quite believed it, because in July she was moved to a clerical role. So she's still working in the office. She's still going out for drinks with nurses. And everyone is apparently happy to drink with her. So because the verdict dropped on Friday and because the case has been before the court for so long, I'm comfortable going down this path of conversation and contemplation. I don't know what else we do, actually, except possibly pontificate on the nature and existence of evil. But what really interests me is how that happened. That year-long process there of a growing number of doctors voicing growing concern, going to a place that is almost impossible to imagine, where you are looking at a colleague and thinking, that person is killing babies. That person is killing. I think what I'm saying is that on a very personal level, I think I would find it easier to believe that she wasn't than that she was. And that is what I suspect is at the heart of this process here. But I'm not a Jobsworth, and I haven't accommodated that push to reputation protection, that immediate, almost innate sense. Again, it would be glib to say that, when people move into management, they change. But when you become, you think that you're personally responsible for reputation protection, whereas consultants are a little bit more independent-minded, perhaps. I genuinely don't know. That's why I'm delighted or lucky that so many doctors will be listening today. But and of course, the clerical role she had was in patient safety, so she'd have access to some of the paperwork that was linked to some of the crimes that she's now been found guilty of. Which again suggests that even after she'd been moved, you have a phalanx of consultant paediatricians convinced that she's killing babies. And then you have all her other colleagues and managers and superiors who still don't think she is, even after she's been moved off the ward. And that's the bit that I am really interested in unpicking a little today, if we can. How did this happen? How do you have a situation, knowing what you know about how hospitals are run or about how the NHS operates, or knowing what you know about people, how do you have a situation where these warnings with grounds for concern, I mean, I think we could call it evidence now, are so completely ignored that even when they're acted on in such a half-hearted fashion that it's clear nobody actually believes the concerns of the people whose concerns have been acted on. It's astonishing. It's astonishing because, no one's ever going to know the numbers, but some colleagues were convinced she was killing babies, and at the same time other colleagues found that suggestion to be utterly, utterly absurd. So how does it happen? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. What do you think? I mean, some things we can't make sense of, right? I think it's important to acknowledge that from the start. Every day we get together, we sit down, we have a cup of tea, and we try and make sense of things that are confusing or complicated, almost every day. Some things we'll never make sense of. Maybe we won't make sense of this, but this is human behavior. This is not something that's happened in to an alien species in a on a planet far, far away. This is something that has happened in the most banal of contexts. It's happened in a place of work, and the stakes are inconceivably high. But how do you account for the year between, or at least the 9 months between somebody joining the dots and somebody taking action? That for me is the crazy bit. And I think a large part of the answer to that question will be, if I said to you, you have two choices, right? Here is a colleague, an incredibly ordinary colleague, a nice colleague, according to the man who first blew the whistle. Here's a colleague. You've got two choices. It's a binary choice. You either believe she's a baby killer or you don't.
And I used to work in a neonatal unit many years ago, and I was lucky enough in my profession to work for the regulator and actually do quality surveillance of
other
hospitals.
Nurses. Right.
Yes, well,
okay.
of hospitals and teams. Yeah, and teams, and be looking at the data. So the consultants, you said earlier, how would they have come to this? They would have been looking at the data. They would have been looking to see what could have happened and sort of almost going through and sort of getting sort of rid of things. Could it be equipment? Could it be what could it be?
Yes.
And these things have to be reported up. But the point I made to your producer was that these things take time to be reported up. So they'd be first reported at a departmental level, then it would go to then it would go up and up the chain. So that would take a while, because you were saying earlier that how come it took a year to get her off the unit, and that's because it's bureaucracy. It would go through this, and I people may have had their suspicions, and there's confidentiality and there's management, how you manage people, but I think to sort of why couldn't people believe that is that and sort of your former caller talking about the sort of like professional inter-rivalries,
yes.
is that you have to have a place, you have to have a safe space so people can raise those concerns, so they can say what they're thinking and what they're feeling without fear. And it appears to me that it became quite adversarial quite quickly.
It looks that way, doesn't it?
Today was the first time I felt really compelled to call in, because I feel that I was just bringing up the conversation about how unassuming or ordinary Lucy looked. It's something that I've been hearing since the conviction was passed on Friday, and I find it really, really difficult actually. So I'm a British Pakistani GP that was born in Manchester, brought up there, and recently moved to Cardiff. But for me, I find it really, really difficult with this unassuming description, because as you know, lots of people have described, Lucy was, a young woman.
Yes.
She was, born to middle-class parents, was educated in the UK, is, what you would consider to be the perfect neonatal nurse. The photographs of
I see what you mean. Yes.
Photographs with babies, have all been sort of what you would assume a neonatal nurse would look like, looking after babies. But from my point of view, like I said, born to immigrant grandparents. Parents were spent most of their life in the UK, and I was educated here as a GP. But if it was my face on the newspaper today, how would I be more assuming than Lucy? And I feel that, as you can hear, I have a very northern accent. I was born in Manchester and brought up there. And if you ask most people who are my friends or my family, I'm the most northern girl they know. So very much in the same way that Lucy's as British as they come. And to me, it feels like if it was my face, a British Pakistani hijab-wearing GP that had committed such a horrible crime, I would have been considered far more assuming than Lucy. And I don't want to just look at it from that angle, because I don't believe that, I don't believe that if it was myself or anybody else, or person of colour, or anybody even slightly different to Lucy, would have been considered more assuming than Lucy did. And I find it's just a bit of an unhelpful description.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Listen.
Thank you.
Well, no, I shouldn't say listen. You haven't finished talking. Carry on, if you want.
I was just going to say that, it feels like, it feels like a bit of a sort of stab in the back, really, to all the years that I've spent educating and, being a member of British society and wanting to help people. If it was my face on the news today, how I would be considered far more likely to have done it than Lucy could have.
The tone of the coverage would be different. I think you're absolutely right. Listen, all I can say to you is that on this show, as I hope you realise, having listened to it for a while, then that the conversation would be exactly the same. The conversation would not be in any way coloured by colour. But Melanie texted just before you came on, actually, to say there is a race element to this. She was believed because she is a young white woman. Look at the reporting yesterday in the Mail. She didn't even get removed from the register until yesterday. When you compare this to complaints made against non-white nurses for much less serious issues, you will find a huge difference.
Yeah, I don't want to make a direct comparison because the cases were very different, but just as an example, the case of Dr. Hadiza Balagaba was another one that resonated with me, because whilst she was accused of negligence and that was investigated, in the end she was found to have been innocent.
Yes.
However, the coverage of that was absolutely appalling compared to some of the coverage that we've seen for the Lucy Letby case. But actually, if you look now, Hadiza Balagaba's reputation is absolutely tarnished, as is probably her career prospect. And this was just somebody who was, yes, accused or yes, investigated, but actually found to have not done anything wrong in that situation, and there were systemic failings. And the fact that even systemic failings has been something that has sort of been used as an excuse for Lucy Letby, again, those same excuses were brushed to aside in that case. And like I said, I don't want to make a direct comparison with that case because it isn't the same, but my feeling is in the way that it's been described all of this weekend, I found it quite upsetting.
I get that. I think Hadiza Balagaba was found guilty and then it was overturned on appeal, wasn't it?
Yeah, but
no, your point stands. I'm just clarifying it for people who won't be aware of either the case or the person that you're talking about. Jack Adcock, a 6-year-old child, and died later that day in part because of failings in his treatment. So, I mean, you're right to remind us that they weren't similar at all. I can't really argue with a single syllable of what you've said, and in some ways I'm part of the problem that you describe, albeit that I don't think I'm guilty of the actual prejudice that you describe. But looking at the coverage, you know that if she had been foreign-born, or I mean, even foreign-born, because, you get that. I forget the case, but trained in Germany and born in Nigeria and came here, and they go through the story, they go through the details in very, very different ways. Different ways from how they do when it is someone who looks... Well, that's why we have the phrase girl next door, isn't it?
Exactly. I actually heard her described on one channel as an English rose, and I found that really offensive. Because it's, yes, I believe that's a description that a lot of people use about a young, young woman who is a neonatal nurse. Of course, like in many situations, that might be considered an English rose. But in this situation where she's been convicted of murdering children, why are we still using descriptions like that as almost a whitewashing of it, or
it's a great
an
point.
English washing of it?
I think I can answer your question, actually, and I don't know if it will be a comfort to you or whether it will add to your sort of sense of injustice, but I mean, we live, of course, in an increasingly diverse population, but that doesn't mean everybody does. So certainly speaking about newspapers and speaking about, if you like, middle-class enclaves, it's more about seeing somebody who you are familiar with, So if you live in an area where there are not many people of colour, or you lead your life in such a way that you don't come across many people who aren't like you, the shock of the familiar is very different from the threat of the other. And so that's a psychological inevitability, but it doesn't detract from the unfairness of the picture you've painted. Unconscious bias.
I think the last thing I'd like to say is that I feel like a lot of the photographs used in any coverage as well there's been very few where I've seen that the very first picture is her mugshot of the woman that has been convicted of murdering babies. There's been lots of photographs of her smiling, holding babies, in her uniform. And I think that's added to this image of, how could she have done this? Which I think is a fair question. It's not a problem to have that conversation. I think it's good that people are having that conversation. How did she go undetected? Or, and even when she was detected, how was she allowed to carry on? I think that's a conversation that is worth having. But I just feel like the coverage
we framed it wrong.
Yes, exactly. And I think
right.
that's what I wanted to say today.
No, well, you said it brilliantly, if you don't mind me saying that.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And I hope you ring me again on a slightly less fraught subject, but your contribution is incredibly valuable and I think probably needed, actually, Jay. So we'll drop that line now immediately about ordinariness, and because what does it even mean? That's my unconscious bias kicking in.
How am I less assuming or unordinary?
Hand on heart, if someone who looks like you was ever caught up in a situation like this, I think I would conduct the conversation in the same way, but I can't be sure, so I won't conduct it in the way that I have been doing.
Oh, well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Take care, Jay. It's 10:46. Yeah. And of course, there'll be racists furious about anybody bringing race into this conversation. But I've just shown you how you deal with it. You just go, yeah, you're right. The phrase English rose, what does that even mean if it isn't a reference to ethnicity? So you can criticise people for bringing ethnicity into it if you want to, but it should be people using the phrase English rose that you're criticising, not people like Jay wondering with much justification how this story would be treated if Lucy Letby didn't tick so many stereotypical boxes of Middle England, if you like, of white Middle England.
I'm a newly qualified nurse. I qualified in April.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My first experience with sort of the nursing culture and NHS management culture was as a first-year student. I'd basically spoken to an elderly patient who had injured her knee out of nowhere, and she told me that a nurse had been transferring her, and she'd fell on the floor and just sort of been left there, and the nurse hadn't helped her, basically, and kept hush about it. So from her description, I had a clue who this nurse was, and I'd spoken to management, and straight away management said, oh, no, none of my nurses would ever do something like that. And from that moment, from feeling like a valued member of the team and, the nurses being really nice to me, no one wanted to help me with my training. No one wanted to take me on when our shift started. Oh, no, we don't want the student today. That's what it went to. And over the next few years, I saw this time and time again where errors would be made or negligence or neglect even, and no one would say anything. And I think really there's such a defensiveness in the practice of nurses in the NHS, and I have no clue why, but I've really come to the conclusion that I don't think everyone comes into this profession for the right reasons.
Okay. Because
you can't. If you allow these things to happen and you don't say anything, how can you be?
You're absolutely. You're clearly right. It'd be naive to think otherwise. Part of me though understands a bit of my job is to protect my team. Do you see what I mean? And you were a new arrival and therefore could still get filed under threat to team. So I can be fiercely protective of my team when the occasion demands. And I wonder whether that could, God forbid, extend into being a little bit dismissive perhaps of people raising concerns. I hope not. But it's the loyalty, because I'm just pointing out that loyalty is a thing that we're encouraged to admire. Loyalty is a thing that we're encouraged to value and to cherish. And therefore, loyalty in that context, from the point of view both of the person you complain to and their colleagues, still looks like a positive.
Yes, I can agree with that. But
I mean, it's not. I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying that's how. Yeah. If we're trying to understand how this stuff can happen, that would be part of the explanation, I think.
Okay, but it's just so rampant, and it happens time and time again. And nurses, there's just such a culture of bullying, and
so you're not enjoying
it's
it?
Awful. I haven't practiced since I qualified in April. I'm debating whether to go back. But...
Well, I wonder if anybody listening might have any words of encouragement for you. No, I really do, because I mean, you could have just been unlucky, couldn't you? You could have just found yourself in a couple of bad contexts, and other contexts would have been much more enjoyable for you.
Yeah, but I can see how this went under the run
because
for
the
so
gut
long,
reaction
because
is reputation protection, and I'm looking after my people.
Absolutely, that's it.
And also, consultants are a nuisance, or in your case, newly qualified nurses are a nuisance. This psychology of whistleblowing is fascinating because you do circle the wagons. The first thing you do, you see it at media organisations as well. Historically, you do. It's getting a lot better now. But how can that go unchecked? How can these allegations have gone unremarked for so long? Because there's almost a psychological push to protect the reputation of the institution, which means not acknowledging the behaviour of the individual. And I don't know how you undo that. I really don't. Thank you, Kim.